They told her she was broken. They told her she was useless. Elena Vance stood on the curb of the mansion she helped build, watching her husband throw her clothes into the mud because she couldn't give him a son. She thought her life was over. She thought she would never know the love of her family. She was wrong. She didn't know that in less than a month she wouldn't just be a mother. She would be the queen to the most powerful predator on earth and the only woman capable of taming his 5 feral children. This is the story of how a rejected wife brought a vampire king to his knees. The air in Dr. Richard Evans' office smelled of rubbing alcohol and bad news. Elena Vance sat on the edge of the crinkling paper of the exam table, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned the color of old bone. "I'm afraid the results are conclusive this time, Mrs. Vance," Dr. Evans said, his voice dropping to that practiced professional somberness that doctors use when they are about to shatter a world. "Your uterus has significant scarring. The likelihood of conception is less than 1%, and even if a miracle occurred, carrying to term would be fatal." Eleanor felt the air leave the room. It wasn't just the diagnosis, it was the finality of it. Beside her, Mark didn't reach for her hand. He didn't offer a comforting squeeze or a shoulder to cry on. Mark Vance, the CEO of Vance Logistics and the man she had loved since college, checked his Rolex. "So it's a defective product situation," Mark said. He didn't look at Eleanor. He looked at the doctor. "There's no fix, no surgery. Money isn't an issue, Richard." "It's not a machine, Mark," the doctor said, his brow furrowing. "It's your wife's body. She's healthy otherwise, but children, they simply aren't in the cards." The ride home in the silver Mercedes was silent. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating like the air before a tornado touches down. Elena stared out the window at the grey Seattle skyline, tears silently tracking down her cheeks. "Mark," she whispered, breaking the silence as they pulled into the driveway of their sprawling estate in Bellevue. "We can adopt. There are so many ways to be a family. Surrogacy, fostering." Mark killed the engine. He turned to her, his handsome face twisted into a sneer she barely recognized. "Vances don't adopt, Elena. We breed. We pass down bloodlines. My father built this empire for his grandson, not for some stray I picked up at an agency." He opened the door and got out. Elena scrambled to follow him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Inside the house was warm, but the atmosphere was glacial. Sitting in the living room was Agnes, Mark's mother. She was sipping tea, her sharp eyes scanning Elena like a predator scanning a wounded gazelle. "Well," Agnes asked, not even offering a greeting, "is she finally going to do her duty? Or is she as barren as that dry patch of garden she tries to tend?" Mark walked past his mother and poured himself a scotch. "It's over, Mother. She's dry, completely useless." Eleanor stood in the archway, trembling. "I am standing right here. I am your wife, not a broodmare." Agnes set her teacup down with a sharp clink. "You were a wife on the condition that you provided an heir. That was the agreement, spoken or not. You come from nothing, Elena. We gave you this life, the clothes, the cars, the status because you were young and healthy. If you cannot perform the one biological function required of you, what exactly are you bringing to the table?" "I love him," Elena cried out, looking at Mark's back. "Mark, tell her we've been married for 5 years. Doesn't that mean anything?" Mark turned around. His eyes were dead. "It means I wasted 5 years. I'm 32, Elena. I need a son to secure the board's vote next year. I can't do that with a wife who is empty." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a white envelope. He tossed it onto the coffee table. "Divorce papers," Mark said casually. "My lawyers drafted them months ago just in case today went this way. Sign them, and you get a small settlement, enough to rent a catastrophic little apartment somewhere. Fight them, and Agnes will ensure you never work in this state again." You had these ready?" Elena gasped, her knees giving out. She sank onto the ottoman. "Pack your things," Agnes said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. "Tonight I have guests coming for the weekend, and I don't want a weepy, barren woman cluttering up the guest wing." "Mark, please," Elena begged, reaching for his hand. He pulled away as if she were contagious. "Get out, Elena. You're done." The humiliation was absolute. Within 2 hours, Elena Vance was standing on the curb. It had started to rain, a cold, biting downpour. She had 2 suitcases containing her clothes and a few books. Her credit cards had already been declined when she tried to call an Uber. Mark had cut her off the second she walked out the door. She dragged her suitcases down the long driveway, the rain mixing with the hot tears on her face. She had no family. Her parents had passed years ago. She had no career. Mark had insisted she quit her teaching job to focus on preparing for motherhood. She was 30 years old, alone, and according to the man she loved, completely worthless. She found a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, using the last of the cash in her wallet. As she sat on the lumpy mattress, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, a fire ignited in her chest. They threw her away because she couldn't have children. They treated her love as a transaction. "I will survive this," she whispered to the empty room. "And one day Mark Vance will regret the day he called me useless, but survival required money, and money required a job." 3 weeks later, Elena was running on fumes. The settlement money Mark promised was tied up in legal processing, another cruelty designed to make her beg. She wasn't going to beg. She sat in a coffee shop, circling ads in a newspaper she'd found on a table. "Waitress needed, cleaner required." Then her eyes landed on a listing that was strangely bolded, boxed in black ink. "Governess needed immediately. Private estate, high risk, high reward. Must have experience with difficult children. Live-in position, $15,000 a month. NDAs required. Apply in person at Blackwood Manor, 9 p.m. tonight." $15,000 a month. Elena blinked. That was unheard of. It had to be a scam or illegal. But she looked at her bank balance on her phone, $4,200. She had no choice. Blackwood Manor was not in the city. It was located deep in the velvet forests of the Pacific Northwest, up a winding road that didn't appear on GPS. The Uber driver refused to go all the way up the driveway, dropping her off at the iron gates. "Place is haunted, lady," he muttered before speeding off. Elena gripped her purse and walked. The manor was a Gothic masterpiece of stone and shadow, looming against the moonlit sky like a beast crouching in the dark. There were no lights on, save for a single flickering lantern at the massive oak doors. She knocked. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The door creaked open. Standing there was not a butler, but a man who looked like he had been carved out of marble and nightmares. He was tall, well over 6', with shoulders that spanned the width of the doorframe. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Mark's entire wardrobe, but he wore it carelessly, the top buttons undone. His hair was jet black, sweeping over a forehead that bore the weight of centuries, but it was his eyes that froze Elena in place. They were amber, burning, predatory amber. "You're late," he said. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. "The ad said 9 p.m., Elena said, checking her watch. "It is 8:59. The man narrowed his eyes. "Punctuality is a virtue. Survival is another. Come in." He turned and walked into the darkness. Elena followed, her heels clicking on the obsidian floor. The hallway was lined with portraits, but they weren't normal. The faces in the paintings seemed to watch her, their eyes following her movement. "I am Sebastian Thorne," the man said, not stopping, "and you are small. You look breakable." "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Thorne," Elena said, her teacher's voice kicking in, "and I'm here for the governess position." Sebastian stopped abruptly and spun around. He moved with a speed that was unnatural. 1 second he was 10 feet away, the next he was towering over her. Elena gasped but didn't flinch. "Do you know why the pay is so high, Miss Mrs. Vance. Elena, she corrected, then winced. She wasn't really a Mrs. anymore. Just Elena. Do you know why, Elena? Because the children are difficult. Sebastian laughed, a harsh barking sound void of humor. Difficult? My children have sent the last 4 governesses to the psychiatric ward. One is currently mute from shock. Another jumped out of a 2nd-story window to escape them. Elena felt a chill, but she thought of Mark's sneer. She thought of the motel room. I've handled 7th-grade boys, Mr. Thorne. I can handle anything. Sebastian studied her. He leaned in close, sniffing the air near her neck. Elena froze. He wasn't smelling her perfume. He was smelling her. You smell of sorrow, Sebastian whispered, and loss, deep, hollowing loss. He pulled back, his expression unreadable. You are not afraid of me. I've been hurt by the people who were supposed to love me, Elena said quietly. Strangers in big houses don't scare me anymore. Sebastian stared at her for a long moment. For a split second, the amber in his eyes softened to a warm gold. Very well, he said. The job is yours on a trial basis. You survive the night, you get the contract. Where are the children? They are in the West Wing. It is locked from the outside, not to keep people out, Sebastian said, handing her a heavy iron key. To keep them in. Mr. Thorne, that sounds like a prison, not a home, Elena said, shocked. They are not normal children, Elena, Sebastian said, his face hardening. I am a widower. I have 5 children. Arthur is 16, Clara is 14, Felix 10, Ivy 6, and Leo is 4. They lack a mother's touch, and they have an abundance of their father's nature. And what nature is that? Sebastian smiled, revealing teeth that were slightly too sharp, slightly too white. Hunger, he said. Good luck, Elena. Don't let them bleed you dry. He turned and vanished into the shadows of the library, leaving Elena alone in the dimly lit hall with a heavy iron key. She approached the West Wing door. She could hear sounds coming from behind it, crashing, screaming, a low guttural growl that didn't sound like a dog. She took a deep breath. Mark said I was barren. He said I couldn't be a mother. I will prove him wrong, even if I have to mother these monsters. Elena unlocked the door and pushed it open. The room was a disaster zone. Furniture was overturned. Curtains were shredded. And in the center of the room, 5 pairs of glowing eyes turned to look at her. Floating near the ceiling was a teenage boy, Arthur. Crouched on the mantelpiece like a gargoyle was a girl, Clara. 2 blurs of motion were wrestling on the floor, Felix and Ivy. And sitting in the center of the rug, staring at her with wide black eyes, was the toddler, Leo. Arthur dropped from the ceiling, landing silently. He bared fangs that were unmistakably real. Fresh meat, the boy hissed. Dad sent us a snack. Elena didn't scream. She didn't run. She dropped her purse, put her hands on her hips, and channeled every ounce of maternal authority she had been denied the chance to use. That is enough, she commanded, her voice ringing clear through the chaos. My name is Eleanor. And if you think you're going to eat the first person who's walked in here to help you, you have another thing coming. Arthur, get down from there. Clara, off the mantel now. The room went silent. The vampires stunned not by holy water or stakes, but by the sheer audacity of a human woman telling them what to do. But in the shadows of the doorway, Sebastian Thorne was watching, and for the first time in centuries, the king of the night felt a spark of something dangerous. Hope. The silence in the West Wing stretched taut as a piano wire. Arthur, the 16-year-old fledgling with eyes like chipped ice, dropped from the ceiling to stand inches from Elena's face. He smelled of dust, dried blood, and teenage rebellion. You think you can order us around, human? Arthur sneered, his fangs lengthening. The last governess begged for her life before Clara threw her through the drywall. Eleanor didn't back down. She channeled 5 years of repressed anger at Mark, 5 years of being told she was less than, and poured it into her gaze. "I am not the last governess, Arthur, and I am not afraid of a tantrum, no matter how sharp your teeth are." She stepped around him, moving toward the center of the room. "This place is disgusting. It smells like a kennel. You are royalty, aren't you? You're living like feral dogs." Clara, the 14-year-old on the mantel, hissed, "We are predators. Father leaves us in here to rot. He only comes when we break something expensive." "Yeah!" 10-year-old Felix shouted, stopping his wrestling match with 6-year-old Ivy. "He hates us because we killed Mom." Elena froze. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. She looked at the 5 faces, stripping away the glowing eyes and the snarls. What she saw left her breathless. They weren't monsters reveling in chaos. They were children drowning in guilt. "What do you mean?" Elena asked softly. "You killed your mom." Arthur looked away, his bravado cracking. "Childbirth," he mumbled. "Vampire pregnancies are volatile. Leo was too strong. She didn't survive his birth. Father can barely look at Leo without seeing her ghost. He locked us away so he doesn't have to deal with us." Elena's heart, already bruised, shattered for these children. She looked down at Leo, the 4-year-old toddler, sitting in the middle of the ruined rug. He looked up at her with enormous, watery black eyes, his thumb in his mouth. He was the monster that had killed his mother. He was just a baby. Slowly, deliberately, Elena knelt down. The older siblings tensed, their muscles coiling, ready to strike if she threatened the little one. Elena ignored them. She held out a hand to Leo. "Hello, Leo. I'm Elena. It's very loud in here, isn't it?" Leo removed his thumb. He sniffed her hand, much like his father had, but with innocent curiosity rather than predation. Then, with a speed that made her gasp, he launched himself into her arms, burying his cold little face in her neck. He began to sob, dry, racking sobs that shook his small frame. A collective gasp went through the room. "He never lets anyone hold him," Ivy whispered, "not even Arthur." Elena stood up, holding the heavy vampire toddler on her hip. She looked at the other 4, her expression fierce with newfound purpose. "All right, new rules," Elena announced. "Arthur, you and Felix are moving the furniture back. Clara, you and Ivy are finding garbage bags for this trash. We are cleaning this room. Then we are going to get you all bathed. You smell terrible." "Make us," Arthur challenged, though his voice lacked its earlier venom. "If you don't," Elena said calmly, bouncing Leo gently, "I will tell your father that a human woman came in here, picked up the brother you're terrified of, and bored you into submission in under 5 minutes. Imagine how humiliating that will be for the future princes of the night." Arthur stared at her. A slow, grudging respect dawned in his eyes. He huffed, rolled his sleeves up, and grabbed an overturned armchair with one hand, righting it effortlessly. "Fine," Arthur muttered, "but only because this place does smell." Elena spent the next 6 hours working harder than she ever had in her life. It wasn't just cleaning a physical mess, it was navigating an emotional minefield with superpowered beings. Felix tried to bite her when she made him wash his hair. She put him in a timeout on the ceiling. Clara tried to psychically push Elena down the stairs. Elena grounded her from levitating for a week. By 4 a.m. the West Wing was habitable. The children, clean for the first time in weeks, were dressed in fresh pajamas, Elena found in untouched drawers. They sat in the newly organized common area, looking shell-shocked but calmer. Elena found a kitchenette tucked away in the corner. The fridge contained only bags of high-grade medical blood. "Is this all you eat?" Elena asked, holding up a bag labeled O negative. "Father says human food is pointless for us," Arthur said, lounging on the sofa. "It's not pointless if it tastes good," Elena retorted. "Do you have flour, eggs, sugar?" They raided the main kitchen downstairs, much to the terror of the human night staff. Elena, with Leo still clinging to her leg like a barnacle, made pancakes. At 5 a.m., Sebastian Thorne unlocked the heavy iron door, expecting carnage. He expected to find Elena Vance emptied of blood. Another failed experiment. Instead, the smell of vanilla and cooked batter hit him. He walked into the common room and stopped dead. His uncontrollable feral children were sitting around a large oak table. They were eating pancakes. Arthur was laughing at something Felix said. Leo was asleep in Eleanor's lap, covered in syrup. Eleanor looked up as the Vampire King entered. Her hair was coming out of its bun. She had smudge marks on her cheek, and she looked utterly exhausted. But her eyes were clear, and she possessed a quiet power that filled the room. "Mr. Thorne," Elena whispered, not wanting to wake Leo, "we're out of maple syrup. Can you put it on the grocery list?" Sebastian stared at the scene, his centuries-old heart skipping a beat. It looked like a home. It looked like something he had lost forever. "Sebastian," he corrected her, his voice strangely thick. "Call me Sebastian." A month passed. Blackwood Manor, once a silent tomb of brooding resentment, had begun to hum with life. It was a chaotic, often dangerous life, but it was life nonetheless. Elena learned the rhythms of the vampire household. The children slept during the day, which gave her time to plan lessons, rest, and try not to think about the divorce papers sitting unsigned in her email inbox. Mark had sent 3 follow-up emails, each colder than the last. He was already seen around Seattle with a 22-year-old swimsuit model. It stung, but the pain was dulling, replaced by the urgent needs of 5 supernatural children who had latched onto her with ferocious intensity. Sebastian was a ghost in his own home. He left before sunset to manage his business interests. Elena chose not to ask what kind of business required a vampire king's attention all night, and returned just before dawn. He watched her, though. Elena felt his eyes on her constantly. Security cameras tracked her movements through the halls. Sometimes when she was reading bedtime stories to Ivy and Leo, she would sense him standing just outside the door, in the shadows, listening. The tension between them simmered. It wasn't just employee and employer, it was predator and prey, man and woman. One night, after finally wrangling a hyperactive Felix into bed, Eleanor went down to the massive library to find a book on medieval history for Arthur's lessons. The library was Sebastian's sanctuary, a cavernous 2-story room smelling of old leather and wood smoke. She thought he was out, but as she reached for a book on a high shelf, a hand materialized over hers, plucking the volume easily. Eleanor spun around, gasping. Sebastian was standing directly behind her, too close. The heat radiating from him was intense, contradicting the coldness of his skin. He was in his usual impeccable suit, but his amber eyes were full, restless. "You should be asleep, Elena," he murmured. His voice was like velvet wrapped around a razor blade. "I needed a book for Arthur," she managed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "He's asking questions about the feudal system." "Arthur is asking questions about something other than how to dismember his enemies." Sebastian raised an eyebrow. "You are a miracle worker." He didn't move away. He leaned in slightly, inhaling the scent at her temple. Elena trembled. She knew what he was. She knew he could snap her neck before her brain even registered the movement. Yet fear wasn't the dominant emotion. It was a strange magnetic pull. "Why do you stay?" Sebastian asked suddenly, his eyes searching hers. "You've seen what they are. You've seen what I am. The money cannot be worth the risk to your life every single night." Eleanor met his gaze. "I have nowhere else to go, Sebastian." "Eleanor," he growled softly, "you are intelligent, capable. You could find work anywhere. Why here? Why with my damaged children?" Elena thought of Mark's mother. Barren, useless woman. "My husband," Elena began, her voice shaking slightly. "Left me because I cannot have children. He told me I was broken, a defective product. He threw me out like garbage." Sebastian went perfectly still. The amber in his eyes darkened to molten gold. A low growl vibrated in his chest, a sound of pure, possessive fury that terrified and thrilled her. "He did what?" Sebastian's voice was deathly quiet. "I'm barren," she whispered, looking down. "I wanted to be a mother more than anything in the world. When I came here, I saw 5 children who didn't need me to give birth to them. They just needed someone to care that they existed. They weren't monsters to me, Sebastian. They were just lonely." She looked back up at him, tears stinging her eyes. "You asked why I stay. Because they need me. And God help me, I think I need them more." Sebastian looked at her as if he had never seen a human being before. He reached out his cold, carved fingers, gently tracing the line of her jaw. The touch sent shockwaves through her body. "He is a fool," Sebastian whispered fiercely. "A blind, pathetic fool. You are not broken, Elena. You are the most whole creature I have met in centuries." His thumb brushed across her lower lip. The air in the library became charged, electric. He leaned closer. Elena's breath hitched. She tilted her head back, an unconscious invitation. His lips were inches from hers. She could feel the cold emanation of his skin, smell the intoxicating scent of night and power that clung to him. "Kiss me," she thought, shocking herself. "Kiss me, and make me forget that I was ever unwanted." Sudden, violent pounding on the front door of the manor shattered the moment. Sebastian pulled back instantly, a snarl ripping from his throat. His eyes turned completely black. The vulnerable man was gone. The vampire king was back. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Do not leave this room." He vanished in a blur of speed. Eleanor stood trembling in the library, the ghost of his touch still burning on her skin. She heard the massive front doors open. She heard voices, deep, angry voices that didn't belong to Sebastian. "We know she's here, Thorn," a rough voice shouted. "The council does not approve of you housing a human pet among royal fledglings. It shows weakness." "My household is none of your concern, Valerius," Sebastian's voice boomed, colder than the deepest winter. "It is when your weakness threatens our secrecy. Give us the human woman, and we will leave your pups alone. Refuse, and we burn this place to the ground with all of you inside." Elena pressed her hand over her mouth to stop a scream. They weren't here for the children. They were here for her. Her presence had brought war to Blackwood Manor. She couldn't stay hidden. She couldn't let those children be hurt because of her. Elena grabbed a heavy brass fireplace poker and ran toward the voices. Elena burst into the foyer, the brass poker gripped in her sweating hands like a broadsword. The scene before her was a tableau of violence waiting to snap. The front doors were blown off their hinges, splintered wood scattered across the obsidian floor. Standing in the entrance were 5 figures cloaked in dark red raincoats, the signature of the Vampire Council's enforcers. At their center stood Valerius, a man with skin like parchment and eyes that looked like they had seen Rome burn. Facing them, standing alone at the bottom of the grand staircase, was Sebastian. He had shed his jacket. His shirt was ripped at the shoulder, revealing skin that was already knitting itself back together. He looked less like a man and more like a concentrated storm of violence. "I will not repeat myself, Valerius." Sebastian's voice was a low, terrifying vibration that shook the glass in the windows. "Step across that threshold, and I will mount your head on my gate." "You harbor a human," Valerius spat, his voice raspy. "A breach of the treaty. She is a liability. Give her to us, and we will make it quick." "She is not a liability," Eleanor shouted, stepping out from behind a pillar. "I am the governess, and I am not going anywhere." Sebastian spun around, his face twisting in horror. "Elena, I told you to stay in the library." "I don't listen very well," she yelled back, moving to stand beside him. She raised the poker. "Get out of this house! You're waking the children!" Valerius looked at Elena, then at the poker, and threw his head back in a dry, rattling laugh. "A human woman protecting the king of night with a fireplace tool. How quaint!" Valerius snapped his fingers. "Kill her. Leave the king." Two of the enforcers blurred into motion. They were fast, faster than the eye could track. Sebastian roared. He intercepted the first one, slamming the attacker into the stone wall with enough force to crack the masonry. But the second one, a female vampire with jagged claws, slipped past him. She lunged for Elena. Elena swung the poker with all her might, connecting with the vampire's ribs. It was like hitting a brick wall. The vampire didn't even flinch. She backhanded Elena, sending her flying across the room. Elena crashed into the side of the stairs, pain exploding in her head. The world spun. She saw the vampire looming over her, claws raised to tear out her throat. "Don't you touch her!" The scream didn't come from Sebastian. It came from the top of the stairs. Arthur stood there, his face a mask of teenage fury. Beside him were Clara, Felix, Ivy, and even little Leo. "Protect Elena," Arthur commanded. For the first time in history, the Thorn children weren't fighting each other. They were fighting as a pack. Arthur dove from the balcony, tackling Elena's attacker. Clara raised her hands, her eyes glowing violet, and telekinetically ripped a heavy tapestry off the wall, smothering another enforcer. Felix, shifting into a cloud of bats, swarmed Valerius's face, biting and scratching. "My children," Sebastian whispered, stunned even as he snapped the neck of the enforcer in his grip. But the council was old and powerful. Valerius threw Felix aside with a wave of his hand. He grabbed Arthur by the throat and lifted him off the ground. "You raised traitors, Thorn," Valerius hissed. "I will end your line right here." Valerius tightened his grip. Arthur gagged, his legs kicking. "Let him go!" Elena screamed. She dragged herself up, ignoring the blood dripping from her hairline. She saw a shard of the broken door, a jagged piece of oak, sharp as a stake. She grabbed it and ran, not at the enforcers, but at Valerius. Valerius was focused on Sebastian and Arthur. He didn't sense the insignificant human until it was too late. Elena drove the wood into Valerius's shoulder. It missed the heart, but it severed the tendon holding Arthur. Valerius roared, dropping the boy. He backhanded Elena again, this time with lethal force. She hit the floor and didn't move. "Elena!" Sebastian's screams shattered the windows. The sight of Elena motionless on the floor broke something inside the king. The restraint he had held onto for centuries evaporated. His form shifted, growing larger, darker, a shadow demon of pure vengeance. He moved so fast he ceased to be visible. In 3 seconds, the remaining 3 enforcers were dismembered. He grabbed Valerius by the throat, lifting the ancient vampire with one hand. "You touched what is mine," Sebastian snarled, his voice a distorted echo. "Thorn, wait," Valerius choked. "If you kill a council member, war—" "Let it burn," Sebastian said. He ripped Valerius's head from his shoulders. Silence fell over the foyer. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the children and the dripping of blood. Sebastian dropped the body and fell to his knees beside Elena. He scooped her up, his terrifying form receding, leaving only a desperate man. She was pale, her pulse thready. "Daddy!" Leo wept, tugging on Sebastian's pant leg. "Is Elena broken?" "No," Sebastian said, his voice cracking. "No, I will not let her be." He looked at Arthur. "Call Dr. Helsing now. Tell him if he isn't here in 10 minutes, I will burn his clinic down." The medical wing of Blackwood Manor was white, sterile, and terrifyingly quiet. Elena lay in the center of the bed, hooked up to monitors that beeped in a slow, rhythmic cadence. Sebastian stood by the window staring out at the rain. He hadn't moved in 4 hours. He was still wearing his blood-stained shirt. He couldn't bring himself to leave her side to change. The door opened. Dr. Helsing, the premier physician for the supernatural community, stepped in. He looked exhausted. "She will live, Sebastian," Helsing said, wiping his glasses. She has a severe concussion and 3 fractured ribs, but she is stable. Sebastian let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 50 years. Thank you. However, Helsing said, his tone shifting to confusion, I found something disturbing in her blood work. Sebastian turned slowly. Disturbing. Was she infected by Valerius? No, not infection, poison. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. Poison? She eats the food here. The children are fine. Not acute poison, Sebastian. Chronic, long-term. Helsing picked up a clipboard. I found high traces of a compound called veratrum luteum. It's a rare herbal extract. In humans, it has one primary side effect. It causes temporary sterility by scarring the uterine lining and suppressing ovulation. If taken daily, it mimics permanent infertility. The room went cold. Explain, Sebastian commanded. She didn't take this willingly, Helsing said. It tastes vile. It would have been masked in coffee or tea, perhaps vitamin supplements. Someone has been dosing this woman for years. The scarring her human doctors saw. It wasn't natural. It was chemically induced. Sebastian felt a red haze of rage descend over his vision. He remembered Elena's story. Mark checked his watch. Defective product. She isn't barren? Sebastian asked, his voice shaking. Barren? Helsing scoffed. Sebastian, once this poison clears her system, which my flush has already started, she will be incredibly fertile. She is a healthy young woman. Whoever told her she couldn't have children was likely the one feeding her the poison. Sebastian gripped the windowsill, the wood pulverized into dust in his hand. It wasn't biology. It wasn't fate. It was Mark Vance. Her husband had drugged her to keep her childless. Likely because he didn't want a child yet, or perhaps he wanted to wait until the merger with a bigger company, or maybe he simply wanted to control her. And then, when he needed an heir for his board vote, he used the symptoms he caused as the excuse to discard her. It was a level of cruelty that even a vampire found chilling. Wake her, Sebastian said. She needs rest. Wake her. She needs to know. When Elena opened her eyes, the pain was a dull throb. She saw the white ceiling, then the amber eyes of Sebastian. He was kneeling by the bed, holding her hand in both of his. The children, she rasped. Safe, Sebastian said softly. They are sleeping in the hallway. They refused to go to their rooms until they saw you. Elena smiled weakly. We won. You won, Sebastian said. He brought her hand to his lips. Elena, there is something you must know. He told her. He told her about the poison. He told her about Dr. Helsing's findings. As he spoke, Eleanor's face went from confused to horrified to shattered. She sat up, ignoring the pain in her ribs. Mark made me my smoothies every morning, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. He insisted. He said it was for my health. He said he wanted me to be strong. She buried her face in her hands. He stole 5 years of my life. He stole my dream, and then he threw me away for it. He didn't steal your dream, Sebastian said fiercely. He moved from the chair to the edge of the bed, pulling her hands away from her face. He delayed it, but he did not destroy it. I feel so stupid, Elena sobbed. I loved him. You are not stupid, you are loyal. And he weaponized that loyalty. Sebastian's eyes burned. But hear me, Elena. You are not barren. You are whole, and you are free of him. Elena looked at him, seeing the raw emotion in his face. The connection that had sparked in the library, that had been forged in the battle, was now undeniable. Why do you care so much? She asked softly. Because, Sebastian said, leaning in, his forehead resting against hers. When I saw you fall, I stopped breathing. I have lived for 400 years, Elena. I have built empires and destroyed armies. But until you walked into that West Wing, I was dead. You brought my children back to me. You brought me back. He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. Mark Vance cast you out because he is a fool who could not see the queen standing before him. I am not a fool. Sebastian, be my queen, Elena, he whispered. Not my employee, not my governess, my equal. Help me raise these wolves, help me rule this night, and if you still desire children of your own blood, we will fill this manor with them, but only when you are ready. Elena looked at the man who had ripped a head off a body to save her, the man who was currently trembling at the thought of her rejection. I have nothing to offer you, she said. I am a human with a suitcase of old clothes. You are the only thing I want, Sebastian replied. He kissed her. It wasn't tentative like in the library. It was acclaiming. It was deep, desperate, and filled with a promise of violence against anyone who ever hurt her again. When they broke apart, Elena felt a strange sensation, a warmth spreading from her chest, pulsing through her veins. The cut on her forehead tingled. She looked in the mirror across the room. The wound was gone. Sebastian, she said, touching her forehead. The cut. Sebastian froze. He looked at her closely, his pupils dilated. Elena, he said slowly, during the fight, did you get any of my blood in your mouth or in your wounds? I don't know. Maybe there was blood everywhere. Why? Sebastian stood up, looking at the monitor. Her heart rate was slowing down, not to a dangerous level, but to a rhythm that was steady, powerful, and distinctly non-human. The bond, Sebastian murmured. It usually takes a formal ritual, but we were in high adrenaline combat. Our emotions were peaked, and if my blood entered your system while you were protecting my bloodline... What are you saying? I'm saying, Sebastian grinned a wild, delighted look, that you aren't just a queen by marriage. Elena, the Thorn blood has accepted you. You are turning. Turning, Elena panicked, into a vampire. No, not a full vampire. A damper, a daywalker. You will have my strength, my lifespan, and my healing. But you can walk in the sun. It is the rarest gift our kind can bestow, and it only happens to a true mate. Elena stared at her hands. She felt stronger already. The pain in her ribs was fading to a dull itch. She wasn't broken. She wasn't weak. She was becoming something new. Just then, the door to the medical room banged open. Arthur stood there holding a tablet. Dad, Elena, you need to see this. He walked over and thrust the screen at them. It was a live news broadcast. Mark Vance was standing at a podium surrounded by microphones. He looked disheveled, frantic. My wife, Elena Vance, has been kidnapped, Mark told the cameras, weeping fake tears. She was taken by a cult, a dangerous group operating out of Blackwood Manor. I am begging the police, the FBI, bring my wife home. I love her. I want her back. Elena stared at the screen. He's lying. He kicked me out. He knows, Sebastian said, his voice dropping to a glacial chill. He knows you are here, and he knows what I am. He is working with the council remnants. He is trying to use the human authorities to breach the manor during the day when I am weak. Sebastian looked at Elena. He wants to destroy us. He wants to drag you back to his mediocrity. Elena took the tablet from Arthur. She looked at Mark's weeping face, the face of the man who poisoned her for 5 years. She handed the tablet back to Arthur. She swung her legs off the bed and stood up. She felt the new power humming in her muscles. Let him come, Elena said, her voice cold and steady. I have a few things to say to my husband. The morning sun beat down on the iron gates of Blackwood Manor. It was a crisp, bright day, the kind of day vampires feared most. That was exactly what Mark Vance was counting on. A convoy of police cruisers, 2 FBI SUVs, and 3 news vans sat idling at the perimeter. Mark stood at the front, wearing a suit that was carefully disheveled to make him look like a grieving, desperate husband. "They're in there!" Mark shouted to the police captain, pointing a shaking finger at the Gothic mansion. "It's a cult. They operate at night. They have my wife. You have to break down the doors before they move her." The captain, a weary man named Miller, adjusted his belt. "Mr. Vance, we have a warrant, but we can't just storm a private estate without proof of immediate danger. We've called the intercom. They won't answer," Mark yelled, playing to the news cameras. "They have brainwashed her, or worse, she's dead. If you don't go in, I will." Mark made a show of running toward the gate. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. He knew Sebastian Thorne wouldn't come out in the sunlight. He knew the monsters would be trapped in their coffins or basement. He would storm in, rescue Elena, and then have the police burn the place down for harboring a kidnapping victim. He would be the hero, and Elena would be back under his thumb, silenced by shame and sedatives. Suddenly, the massive iron gates groaned. The gathered crowd went silent. The heavy metal swung open slowly. Mark froze. He expected darkness. He expected silence. Instead, a woman walked out. She was wearing a long, flowing dress of deep crimson, fitting her curves perfectly. Her hair, once pulled back in a severe bun, cascaded over her shoulders in lustrous waves. She didn't look broken. She didn't look drugged. She looked like a goddess of war. It was Elena, and she was walking directly into the sunlight. "Elena!" Mark gasped, running forward, remembering his role. "Oh, thank God, Elena, run to me. You're safe now." He reached out to grab her. Elena didn't run. She stopped 10 FT away from him. She looked at him with eyes that held a strange, new luminosity. "I am safe, Mark," she said. Her voice wasn't a shout, but it carried across the driveway, clear and commanding. "I am safe from you." Mark stopped, confused. The cameras were rolling. "Honey, you're confused. The drugs. They've messed with your head. Come to the car." "The only drugs in my system," Elena said, reaching into her pocket and pulling out a sheath of papers, "were the ones you fed me for 5 years. She threw the papers at him. They fluttered to the ground like white doves. "Dr. Helsing's report," she announced, turning to the cameras. "Toxicology screening. For 5 years, Mark Vance spiked my morning smoothies with veratrum luteum, a poison designed to induce sterility. He poisoned his own wife to keep her from having children, and then divorced her for being barren." The reporters gasped. The cameras zoomed in on the papers. Captain Miller picked one up, his eyebrows shooting into his hairline. "That's a lie!" Mark screamed, his face turning red. "She's insane! That monster Thorne put her up to this." "Mr. Thorne has nothing to do with your cruelty," Eleanor said calmly. "You cast me out, Mark. You threw my clothes in the mud. You left me with nothing. And now that I have built a life, a real life, with a family who loves me, you try to destroy it." "Family?" Mark sneered, dropping the act. "They are freaks. Thorne is a monster. Where is he?" "Ha! Hiding in the dark like the rat he is. He is right here." The voice came from the shadows of the manor's front archway. Sebastian Thorne stepped out. Smoke instantly began to rise from his expensive suit. His skin hissed as the sunlight hit it. Vampires burned in the sun. It was agonizing. It was lethal. But Sebastian didn't stop. He walked down the steps, his face stoic, enduring the excruciating pain of the solar fire just to stand beside his queen. Behind him, 5 figures appeared in the doorway: Arthur, Clara, Felix, Ivy, and Leo. They were wrapped in heavy hooded cloaks, watching their father burn for the woman he loved. "Sebastian, go back!" Elena cried, turning to him. "You're hurting." "I will not let you face him alone," Sebastian gritted out, smoke curling off his cheek. He stopped beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. The smell of singed fabric filled the air. "I would walk through hellfire for her, Vance. What would you do? Poison her tea?" The contrast was stark. The vampire enduring flames for love versus the human husband who lied and poisoned for control. Mark looked at the police, then at the cameras. He saw the tide turning. He saw his reputation crumbling. "Arrest them!" Mark shrieked, lunging at Elena. "She's mine! She's my property!" He grabbed Elena's wrist, his nails digging in. "You're coming home with me, you useless brute!" Mark expected to drag her. He expected her to be weak. Elena didn't budge. She looked at his hand on her wrist. Then she looked at him. "I am not useless," she whispered. She twisted her arm with her new damper strength. The movement was a blur. There was a sickening crack. Mark screamed, falling to his knees, clutching his broken wrist. "And I am certainly not yours." Elena shoved him. Mark Vance, the CEO, the man who thought he ruled the world, flew backward 10 FT, landing in a heap of dust at the feet of the police captain. "Captain Miller," Elena said coolly, "I would like to press charges against my ex-husband for poisoning, assault, and filing a false police report." Captain Miller looked at the weeping, broken man on the ground. He looked at the medical report in his hand. He looked at the smoking vampire king and the glowing woman beside him. "Cuff him," Miller ordered his officers. As they dragged Mark away, screaming threats and profanities, Elena turned to Sebastian. She threw her cloak over him to shield him from the sun. "You idiot," she said, tears in her eyes, checking his burnt skin. "You could have died." "I told you," Sebastian smiled, wincing as his skin began to heal instantly under the shade of her cloak. "You are my queen. Kings do not hide while their queens fight." Elena kissed him right there in front of the news crews and the police. The siege was over. The reign of Elena Thorne had begun. 1 year later, the ballroom of Blackwood Manor was filled with music. It was the winter solstice, the most important night of the vampire calendar. Elena stood on the balcony, watching the guests below. The elite of the supernatural world were there, werewolves in tuxedos, fae in shimmering gowns, and vampires who bowed their heads as she passed. "Mom!" Elena turned. Felix and Ivy came running up the stairs. "Mom, Arthur is hoarding the blood fountain again," Ivy complained. "And Clara is floating the hors d'oeuvres to the ceiling, so I can't reach them," Felix added. Elena laughed. "I'll handle it. Go tell your father to stop talking to the ambassador and come dance with his wife." The children scrambled off. Elena placed a hand on her stomach. She wasn't just a stepmother anymore. The miracle Dr. Helsing predicted had come true. She was 4 months pregnant, a damper child, the bridge between two worlds. Sebastian appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "They are terrorizing the guests," he murmured happily. "They're happy," Elena said, leaning back into him. "We all are." "Mark Vance was sentenced today," Sebastian said softly. 20 years, the poison charges stuck. Elena looked out at the moon. She thought of the rain, the curb, the despair she felt that night she was thrown out. She thought of the woman who believed she was broken. "I don't care about Mark," Elena said, turning to kiss her husband. "He belongs to the past. I'm too busy building the future." The vampire king smiled, his fangs glinting in the moonlight. "Long live the queen." Wow, what a journey! From being thrown out on the street and told she was worthless to commanding a legion of vampires and finding a love that literally walked through fire for her. Elena's story is a reminder that someone's inability to see your worth does not decrease your value. Sometimes you have to be rejected by the wrong person to be found by the right people. Mark thought she was a broken vessel, but she was actually a chalice waiting for the right wine. Now I have to ask you guys a question. If you were Elena, would you have broken Mark's wrist, or would you have let the vampires tear him apart? I know what I would have done. Let me know your verdict in the comments below. If you enjoyed this saga of revenge, romance, and vampire chaos, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. We have a werewolf saga coming up next week that you do not want to miss. Thanks for watching, and remember, you are the protagonist of your own life. Don't let anyone write you out of the script. See you next.